There's certain things I've always just felt I knew. Even when people tell me that's not how it is, I felt like I knew. And so I started reading about how you can heal yourself if you know you can heal yourself.
Hey, Dr. Rahm, and welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be on your show.
Well, we're really excited to have you on our show as well. So can you please share with our folks some of your background? You're an author, you're a mom, you're an entrepreneur, you're a scientist. I mean, you are sort of the Renaissance woman of this community. So talk to us about all of these accomplishments that you've been able to achieve over the last several years of your life.
I'm like you said, I'm a mother of four. I spent a lot of time in college getting different degrees that had to do with different types of medical science. And I love what I do. I ended up working for pharmaceutical companies for years, like Pfizer, J&J, Bristol Myers, a lot of companies actually that I worked with viruses. I worked with rare diseases. And then I kind of pivoted. I was a CEO for years of healthcare companies, and I started working on natural supplements. Probably all of it originated actually from having Lyme disease, being sick, and wanting to have natural things that could help people. But I also understood the pharmaceutical side of it. Like I was on some special projects at pharmaceutical companies working on actually Lyme disease. So I think that I was motivated, having Lyme disease and having cancer. I was really motivated to achieve things every day that could help people with solutions. And that's really what has led me to where I am right now, to be honest.
Let's talk about your Lyme journey first, and we'll sort of connect that to your cancer journey. But you began your Lyme disease journey at 19 after discovering that you were bitten by a tick. So talk to us about the circumstances under which you found yourself bitten by a tick, and how did that develop for you?
Yeah, I was working in North Carolina at a conference center, a Christian conference center actually, and we went camping and I got in a bed of seed ticks. And when I got that's what they said. They said they were seed ticks. And then I got back and I loved working there. I really enjoyed it. But they found a bite that they thought was a brown recluse bite. And so the medic there said, this is a brown recluse bite. I had a high fever, but then I just kept getting worse. And it was really a classic bullseye, but at the time, I'm pretty old. So back then they didn't know what it was. And so they kept saying, you're going to get better. They treated me with some things. I don't remember exactly what it was at that time. I'll be honest, I lost a lot of my memory through that. I ended up, I fainted at a movie theater with friends there. My fever was 105, almost 106. I ended up in the ICU. I was there. I had spinal taps, diagnosed with meningitis, very sick, could not even remember my parents' names, couldn't remember anything. And I was a straight A student. I, was an athlete. My life was great. It was like everything was perfect. And when that happened, my life changed pretty dramatically.
Dr. Rahm, what was the window of time between the tick bite or bites when you came in contact with this bed of seed ticks and bed of ticks and of the seed ticks? I can't say the word seed. And when you became chronically ill, what was that window of time?
The bite was horrible and I started not feeling great, but I was in college. You're trying to have fun in college. It was like 2.5 weeks that it got really progressively worse.
I want to explore that with you a little bit, because it's pretty rare for someone to go from tick bite to chronic illness in that shorter window of time, with a couple of exceptions, right? When we've interviewed many of the leading Lyme experts, so they be Dr. Rawls or some of the other leading experts that we've interviewed, what we've discovered is that it's very rare that you would go from bite to illness unless there are two circumstances. One of which is if you suffer multiple bites, which it seems like you must have when you found yourself in this bed of ticks. The second circumstance, of course, is when somebody's living in, for example, in a Lyme. They're living in a mold infested house, or and they're immunocompromised, and they suffer a tick bite, and then they get sick. So talk to us about, first you had these multiple tick bites, so that makes perfect sense. What was your environment like at that time as well? Do you think you were immunocompromised because you were in the presence of mold or anything like that?
Well, I've always had issues with my health, actually, but I had bites all over me. There was just one bite that was significant, but I had like it looked horrible, right? And they explained that maybe I got bit by more than one brown recluse, right? And I was living in a dorm-like setting that I'm sure. I mean, I remember there was mold everywhere, and we were outside, and it was in the country, and there was it was just not a I can't say it wasn't a safe environment. It was like living in a cabin, right? That didn't have air conditioning, that didn't have, we all shared bathrooms together, stuff like that. So it was, and I loved being there, but it was definitely a situation where it wasn't like a house where things were being cleaned regularly. It was one of the environments. Yeah.
So it sounds like you had the perfect storm, right? You were living in a moldy environment for this window of time. You get bitten by multiple ticks. You have healthcare professionals who at the time really didn't have, well, not that they're particularly competent now in the Western world, but certainly didn't have the competence to help you get through prophylactically dealing with these bites, and you became chronically ill pretty quickly.
Pretty quick. And I say 2.5 weeks. It was, I became very ill in 2.5 weeks. I didn't end up in the hospital till probably 3, almost 4 weeks. I don't remember. I completely lost my memory. It was a really bad situation. And at the time, not very many people knew about Lyme disease. So I had an infectious disease doctor, which happened to have been one of the few doctors that knew about it back then. Because you're talking, 30 years ago. 30 plus years ago. So, I just remember him even giving me all these tests. I tested positive, the Teeter score, that gave me all these tests. I didn't understand really what he was saying. My family was back in Missouri. My best friend that was my roommate in college happened to be at the camp working with me. And it was really bad. Like I ended up in the hospital they ended up giving me Rocephin IV treatments and all these kinds of different treatments they were trying that were like chemotherapy. And all the veins collapsed in both of my arms. They put a shunt in. Of course, I can still feel it on my left side to administer medicine. I lost my hair. I lost my eyelashes. I started swelling. They had me on prednisone and different types. I think they even tried methotrexate. I was on a lot of different things, and they would have a nurse come once they'd let me leave after 2 weeks. They were scared I was going to die. They could not, had ice everywhere. They couldn't get the fever down. But by the time I got back to the camp, they did not want me to go home to Missouri so I stayed there for the summer with someone coming every day to give the IV treatments. They were worried if I left, I wouldn't get the right treatment because there weren't a lot of doctors that were handling Lyme disease at the time. So it became, if you ask me about that summer, all I remember is getting sick constantly. I went from being this active person that was happy to not being able to get out of bed. And when I got out of bed, I was just so sick that I was miserable. I remember thinking, I can't live this way. It was really bad. And I still remember being very emotional and sad. And I went from having a photographic memory to not understanding anything, and that was probably the hardest part for me because I had always been one of these kids that I knew I wanted to do all these things with my life, and to lose my memory and my ability to be the top person in school was really hard for me.
So Dr. Rahm, at this point, when they gave you the IV Rocephin and they're throwing everything, but the kitchen sink at you, were you feeling any better in the short term?
I felt horrible. It was, they tried a type of chemotherapy. And, now back then I wasn't the person I am now. Like now I understand every medication, that's what I've done for a living. So, but back then I didn't know. I just knew that every time they came, I got sick after the treatments, and I couldn't figure out if it was from the Lyme disease or what they were giving me, but they explained to me they had to do it. They did it for a period of about 3 months. And then I ended up going back to college. They actually told me I shouldn't go to college for 2 years. I needed to take at least a year off, but my parents were like, you're going to go back to school and you're going to be fine. And, it was really hard. I was in a sorority. When I went back to school, I didn't want to go to the parties. I didn't want to get up. Thankfully, the college let me basically take classes, not online, but I didn't have to go to school. I just went to take the test. The problem was I couldn't even remember the question. Like, I remember reading the question, and if you said to me, what is 2 + 2 at the time, I might understand that it was 4, but I wasn't even able to write 4. Like, they diagnosed me with rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis, so I had all these diagnoses. And if you saw my pictures back then, you wouldn't recognize me. I mean, I looked horrible.
So Dr. Rahm, just for clarity, this summer when you got diagnosed with Lyme disease, was there any other tests done for other tick-borne illnesses? And you mentioned chemotherapy. Were they using chemo for the Lyme, or were they using that for some other, other treatment that you had another condition for?
It was an experimental treatment he was trying. No, they were using it for that and for supposedly the rheumatoid. It was more like a human monoclonal antibody, but it was a type of chemotherapy trying to help me with the rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis and all the other things that they had diagnosed me with. They did test me for everything else. Yes, they tested me for everything under the sun. They did repetitive tests on everything during that time. I have to be honest, I had a really good doctor. I still remember, I don't know if I should say this. My mom and dad did not believe in Lyme disease, and they just wanted me to be okay. And he was pretty upset because he knew how serious it was. And I have really great parents, but he was not that nice to my parents because he tried to explain. At the time, my dad had read some stuff and he thought it was just a made up illness. And so, yeah.
But when you went back to college after that summer, did your doctor, who was Lyme literate, tell you that you were quote unquote cured from Lyme? Or was he telling you needed more treatment and your parents said, oh, Lyme's not real, go back to school and be normal? What happened at that point?
That's what happened. He basically was like, you're going to keep needing treatment. You need to be followed. But I ended up really starting to research things and look into things. And I started understanding that antibiotics and antifungals and different type of medication could help me. I took myself off of the prednisone. I hated it. I actually, in the end, was like, I was glad my parents, I didn't want to do it anymore. I just didn't. And I started researching natural things that could help me. I was raised on a farm by a mother that's, Cherokee and Choctaw Indian. I was raised with natural things anyway. And so for me, the treatments they were giving me, I did not believe were a long-term solution for me personally. It made me so, so sick. I felt like they were killing me.
Dr. Rahm, you're not alone in that. And also people not believing in chronic Lyme or Lyme in general is not uncommon because of all the controversy that's out there. We call them the Lyme wars, right? But let's talk more about your pivot from Western medicine to natural medicine, because we know that you're the author of Cure the Causes, this brilliant book that you've written. We know that you're the founder of Root Wellness, and you have all these supplements that you've now, today been able to create to help people that are unwell and looking to improve their health. You've been featured in Forbes magazine. I mean, so you've really did this 180 with your health. So share with us when you started to have this transition into natural medicine and what that was like for you and how your health started to improve.
I started realizing that now that I'm thinking about this, because we're walking through this journey with me, I did stay on prednisone, and they tried a cyclosporin and a methotrexate and all these things. I remember they had me on a kind of antibiotic. It wasn't Zithromax. I actually ended up working on Zithromax with Lyme disease later at Pfizer. I had an experience with that. But during that time, everything they were giving me was making me extremely sick. I'm sure, now that I look back, the microbiome of my body was messed up. They did not have me, like I should have been on antifungals, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that now I understand because of the research I've done. Like I've had the luxury at this point of being involved in research at some of the top companies that we didn't push out all the results, but I saw some things that worked with Lyme disease. But back then I started reading about turmeric curcumin and different things that I could take and I could get at like GNC, right? Or at stores. I didn't have a ton of money back then because I was in college. So I started taking things that were supplements and things that I thought would help me basically rebuild my body. And a lot of that, I think, comes from being raised on a farm in a natural environment by parents that did not want me at doctors all the time. Me understanding that we used to use different salve and different plants to help us. I mean, that's how I was raised. So when I started making that transition, I started feeling better. But I will say this, it was a good, 2, 3, 4 years, actually 4 strong years before I was really able to, I know this sounds really odd, but to comprehend and to understand even the classes I was taking. Like I went from undergrad to graduate school I can't believe I was able to make that transition to graduate school because my grades were not good. I think it was my personality though, and my ability to not give up and to keep trying. I'm thankful to my parents for that, to be honest, that they kept saying, you can do it, you can get out of bed, you can go. And gradually the rheumatoid arthritis, I started feeling better. I mean, I remember not being able to bend my fingers and do anything, but I think it was me taking the transition. In fact, I know it was of, I'm going to try to do a little bit every day. I had studied some stuff on different types of salts and different types of zeolites and things like that that could help. And I just was fortunate enough to go back to really my roots of how I was raised on what I thought I should do for myself. But I'm just going to be honest with you guys, I didn't have any guidance from anyone else. There was never anyone there I could talk to really about this.
Yeah. And you know, there's so much of this, I think, is this root cause medicine is so bio-individual. We talk about this a lot on this podcast, Dr. Rahm, where you have to figure out what you need and then try to find doctors to work with you, but you're sort of the detective and you're the core person to be able to navigate throughout this journey that is chronic illness, right? So you mentioned a lot of things that you use naturally to start improving your health, and it took many years for you to make some improvements. But looking back at your journey, give us some ideas of the top natural treatments you use to help you with your Lyme disease. You know, what herbs, what binders, specific things that have helped you in your own bio-individual health to get the gains that you were able to achieve to be where you are today.
Yeah, I used a lot of aloe vera cleanses. I did a lot with turmeric curcumin. I did a lot with at the time, I remember studying black cumin seed and, you know, oils and how that could help. I did a lot with that. I did a lot with the grains, which I ended up reverting back to when I ended up being diagnosed with a brain tumor. Because, by the way, and we may not get into this, we may not have time, but I really believe the fact that I had cancer while I was pregnant and had different types of cancer stemmed from epigenetics happening from that Lyme disease. So I really, even though doctors don't correlate that, I think that that was part of the reason why I've had this multiple bouts of cancer. But at the time, I really kept going back to the plants I was raised around, the environment that I had been raised around, and how I could help my body naturally get better. I did take a lot of vitamins. I remember taking high vitamin C, high vitamin D, zinc. I mean, really trying to heal my own body. And I took high levels of that, by the way. And I do agree with you. Everybody's journey is different. Back then, even then, as a teen, as a college student, I believed in chiropractic care. I believed in acupuncture. I believed in getting massages to help myself, and yoga. And mentally, I spent a lot of time meditating, praying, really working on innerly helping myself get better. And I know that sounds odd, but for me, that I know that helped me. I did a lot with drinking lots of water, and with lemon, drinking lots of things with lime. I focused a lot on the citrus because of the vitamin C. So I did a lot of things. I would say it was a constant focus of mine, even in college. And in college, when you're in a sorority and you're busy doing all these things, usually, I'm sure if that wouldn't have happened to me, that would never have been my focus. Like it kind of changed me to become this person that really cared about my health and really cared about what was going on. I even used like eucalyptus and menthol and stuff on my joints. I was focused the whole time on detoxing this out of my body and getting it out. I had this visual of this virus being inside of me, laying eggs, and I just wanted to get rid of it. So I really, and then I caught something. I'll still remember this, and this isn't a natural solution, but what I caught was, of course, my immune system was bad, so I kept getting sick. So when I went to, you know how you go to the doctor on campus when you're in college, I went and they would do some IVs, because another thing that happened during that period is I was diagnosed with parasites at one of the hospitals, and I ended up staying in the hospital. They almost did an appendectomy, but they didn't, because they showed me these parasites that they found inside of me. I really still believe a lot of that came, again, from Lyme disease. I had huge GI issues. So I started focusing on really helping the microbiome of the stomach. I started researching that. And so I really focused on my stomach, my heart, and my brain. And how do I get that clean? How do I help myself? I would drink celery juice. Like I would drink these green shakes, really focusing on getting that out. And at the time, again, I was not a scientist. This was not my, I was an artist. I was someone that loved having fun. So it was just me continually going to the library. At the time, we didn't have these computers where everyone saw everything. So I kept going, and I'll tell you what I did. I researched parasites. I researched different types of ticks. I researched different types of spiders, and I used a lot of the things that I read naturally to help myself get better from Lyme disease.
Dr. Rahm, what I like so much about what you just described is you gave us so much information for people to heal from Lyme, but all the real easy things you can do that are really cheap. What we hear often is, I can't afford to treat Lyme. It's too complicated, but you just gave us so many natural things to do to address the entire body: parasites, Lyme, detox, immune support, full body support that you use to overcome chronic Lyme disease. And it doesn't sound like it was super expensive to implement a lot of those techniques, correct?
Correct. And I kind of got off topic a little bit. I did catch that when I would get sick, they would give me an antibiotic. And then I would get a yeast infection, because a lot of people will. And I don't know if you've heard this, but you probably have. A lot of people that have Lyme disease have more fungus, right?
Yep.
And actually the ticks and the parasites breed in the fungus. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of knowledge, but I've always been one of these people that I pay really close attention to my body, like what's going on. And I noticed that when I would take an antibiotic and then an antifungal, I would start to feel better. I mean, for my body, I would start to literally feel better. And it was interesting when I went to work at Pfizer. It's amazing how the universe works out, because I go to work for Pfizer, and I worked in an area of Pfizer that had to do with diflucan, which is an antifungal, and Zithromax, which is an antibiotic. So and then we were doing this project on anthrax, and it was on the marketing side, and I was brought into it at Camp Pendleton. And I remember saying, oh my gosh, this is why I'm feeling better sometimes when I get really sick and I use this, it helps me. And so I had the ability, because of different things I did, to have all this medication as well as natural things, right? And so I kind of became my own doctor, which I think led me on the path that I am now, because doctors could not help me. They could not answer my questions. I started feeling like they thought I was crazy. So I stopped going to doctors, because I didn't want them to act like something was wrong with me. And candidly, I got tired of talking about it and complaining. So I kind of took matters into my own hands. But I was fortunate, because I was exposed to all of this by working for one of the top, pharmaceutical companies in the United States. And even though they never released that, I was part of a project where I got to see that.
And Dr. Rahm, this is something you discuss in the intro of your book, where you say you are the help and the solution you're searching for, right? I mean, that's something you really emphasize in your book, where the patient needs to be empowered and the patient can get better. Yeah. And there are simple, affordable things we can do. And you talk about them in your book, and that's what you did in your own life, right? So what else did you do that we may have missed, right? I mean, obviously now you went on, you're this brilliant scientist, you've written books, it's just, your career is amazing and your qualifications are off the charts. But parasites, you had probably candida, you had fungus, you had Lyme disease, right? What else was going on in your body, and what ate you doing to treat, if anything, that we may have missed on this interview so far?
Well, I became very careful. Like for 3 years, I was a vegan, and I ate grains. I didn't eat any sugar. I didn't have alcohol. I just really tried to clean everything out and focus on my body being the inside. So I did take a lot of Epsom salt baths. I did take a lot of, I traveled to places where, this is going to sound odd probably, but like to the sea, so I could try to detox things out. I had this huge thought process again that I was not getting the spiral sheets out. And I understood enough, especially because if you really look, like when people tell me they've had Lyme disease and had issues for 10 years, that doesn't shock me at all. Because if you really look at my life, I had continuous problems until I would say that was when I was 19, until I was 32. I had these continuous, and I was continuously on this journey. I would start having my joints swell. I would start gaining weight. There was always something that was happening, and I would always go on these cleanses. I really would. I would do these green cleanses drink lots of water, drink lots of lemon juice. I would take different types. I would gargle salt because I knew that there was a type of salt that could really help cleanse the body as well. I would even drink like a gallon of salt. I tried everything, right? And it was interesting. I think part of it's mental too. I think you have to figure out what your path is and how you should help yourself. You can't give up. And it's your own journey. Like, I don't think my journey is the same as everyone's. I did use infrared saunas. Back then it was not a thing, but I found people that had different types of saunas and I used them. I noticed it helped. So again, I really believe it was me paying attention to my body and figuring out how I could help myself.
Doctor, I'm looking at this big picture. It seems like you went from being completely bedbound and losing your mind within 4 weeks to becoming your own advocate, working with a variety of doctors and professionals, but you taking the charge in that to getting your health back. But over 13 years, you were going through this internal balance and war and struggle of health and illness, health and illness. And so you finally found a way to get yourself over that hill, I'll call it, to find health. And let's talk more about the root products that you have, right? I know we only have a few minutes left in this interview, but this whole root cause healing is so important. And now you have this brand Root. You have a ton of supplements you're selling that you've built and really, specify for people that are struggling with gut issues and Lyme and chronic illness. So if you can just transition into that for us and explain the root cause healing you found and how it led you to develop the Root brand that you now have and that's helping so many people around the world.
Yeah. So what happened was I was working with the NBA and the NFL Alumni Association. I met this guy named John Sally. He's a basketball player. He introduced me to my husband now, who's now Clayton Thomas. So when John introduced me to him, is because John wanted me to work on a formula that would help like heal different parts of the body after injuries, because athletes have so many injuries. He also wanted something that would help with CTE and different things. And so I was in all these meetings. And they started talking about zeolites, which is a type of crystal or salt. And remember how I told you that I had looked into all of this when I had Lyme disease? I actually probably never would have taken the project I took if I didn't have Lyme disease, because I started looking into it. I was asked by Germany's Innovation Fund or group, which is part of their government, to come and speak on some topics, and met a bunch of people in that space who had worked with zeolites and different types of silicas and different types of bentonite and all these things. And I threw myself into it because the more I read, the more I understood how it would cause the spiral sheet to break apart, and how it was, and it kind of clicked. Oh my gosh, that's why that used to help me. Right. And so I took the project. I ended up writing a patent in 2015 that had 168 claims, which involved part of this, and the patents were accepted. They were challenged for years by competitors and finally accepted. I can send you a copy of it if you want. The patents got approved for reversal of aging and anti-cancerogenic effects and getting rid of nuclear waste, but there's also elements in there that talk about the Lyme disease and spiral sheets. And since that time, I've written 10 additional patents, and some of those have things in there as well about the spiral sheets and the Lyme disease. My goal was to keep the levels down of this illness, this virus, these bacteria, the fungus. I wanted to keep it all down so the spiral sheets couldn't nest and breed. And so I can't say things past the brain barrier because it's a nutraceutical, but I wanted it to be able to communicate so that the brain would be healthy. Because if you ask me how I felt, I can still feel, it still makes me feel yucky when you bring this subject up, because I remember thinking my brain was on fire. Like, my brain's not my brain anymore, even though it's still me, it couldn't unlock. So my goal was to give hope, and I wanted something I could take all the time instead of an antibiotic and an antifungal. I wanted something natural. So that whole line at Root is for people that are healthy, but I really made it, I don't mean this selfishly, but for me and for my family, because I believe that I was pregnant and that I passed this on to my kids, even though they don't realize it. And I want my kids to be healthy. And so my focus on developing the line that I did at Root was to use turmeric and curcumin, resveratrol, to use, black cumin seed. But I want to tell you, aloe vera, apple cider vinegar, spirulina, chlorella, barley, wheatgrass. I could go on and on. I wanted something that was non-GMO, gluten-free. So I used things before they would sprout. So even if it was a grain that was a wheatgrass, it didn't have gluten in it. You know, I really wanted this because I wanted to be able to give to people something that didn't have the sugars, that didn't have all these things, and help heal the microbiome of the stomach, help keep spiral sheets and the viral loads down and the bacteria and the fungus, because I think they're all connected. And I think that when you get Lyme disease, the real thing that I think happens is this inflammatory cascade, and all of that stuff, because it goes down, it just starts breeding in the body. So my goal was part selfish, to be able to create natural products that were really expensive to make, but really good, so I can make them in bulk so that I could take them the rest of my life. And I can tell you, the Clean Slate formula is basically my 7th version. I ended up making it, and really, if you taste it now, you'll taste the salt because I embedded it with high amounts of trace minerals and vitamins, because I wanted something that would be a catalyst, bioavailable, and communicate in the body that could keep this down. And since I've been on the products I make, I feel better than I've ever felt. I don't experience the rheumatoid arthritis, but I do sometimes have to go up. And I don't want your audience to do this, but for me, I sometimes have to take half a bottle. If I start feeling sick or feel like it's coming back, I will drink half a bottle of the Clean Slate, and I'll take more of the Restore so that I can make sure that I have the turmeric root at a very high level in my body. I made the 0N, which is the 3rd product, because of the neurotransmission of the brain. I don't know if your audience knows this, but when you get Lyme disease, the neurotransmission of the brain, it's like depleted, right? And then I also made a product that produces NAD in the body and protects the mitochondria and the glutathione, because I understand too, when the spiral sheets are in there, your NAD is depleted, but people may or may not know this. The spiral sheets have NAD. So NAD is in every living organism. And the problem is, if your body is depleted in NAD and they have NAD, then you can't get better because your body's not strong enough to fight it. So I don't like to talk about Lyme disease a lot because it makes me cry. It almost ruined my life, to be honest. And it took me from being this person that had my whole life, that I thought was going to be this fantastic life, to something that for years it was, you couldn't even talk about it to people because no one even knew what it was. And if they did, they didn't want to hear it. And so I really feel blessed that I was put in a situation to become a scientist, that I was able to get my memory back. And I do want to tell you this, I never fully got my memory back. I used to be able to look at a piece of paper and I never had to study. I never had to worry about it. It took years for me to relearn even simple math and science. I mean, I almost failed out as math and science in college, but yet I had straight A's in high school because I couldn't even communicate. Like you told me earlier, you couldn't communicate before the show. That's how I was. I couldn't even say my name is Christina, right? It was bizarre. So I feel now fortunate, but I can see how people almost give up because it's really hard to have this disease, this illness, and not have people understand.
Well, Dr. Rahm, first of all, thank you for coming on and sharing such a difficult part of your life. We know it's not easy. And thank you for providing hope and inspiration to our listeners, because I mean, hearing where you were and seeing where you are now is such a radical transformation. And it's so beautiful to see how far you've come and how well you're doing. We're going to put links in the show notes of this podcast for your root products because we think they're amazing. And we want to encourage our listeners and our followers to go check them out at your website. And that'll be in the show notes. We're also going to put a link to your book, Cure the Causes, in our show notes as well. Brilliant book. And we are very, very happy to share that with our listeners and audience as well to listen to that. And we're going to, on the spot, invite you, Dr. Rahm, to come back on for some other future endeavor with us, whether it's a follow-up podcast episode or some other educational series we can do, because there's so many other topics we feel we can dive into with you in great detail to help the Lyme community at large. So again, just thank you so much for your time today on this interview. And thank you so much for joining our Tick Bootcamp podcast, Dr. Rahm.
Thank you. I'd love to come back. I'm almost starting to cry, so I hope I don't do that next time. So anyway, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad you're such a great example for people. And I hope it does give hope, because it's easy to give up. And I don't want anyone in your community to do that.